In my previous video, I showed you the places I visited during the first 5 days of my Great Lakes cruise on the cruise ship Pearl Mist. In today's video, it's part 2 of the story, a look at all the places the ship visited during the second half of the cruise, such as beautiful Mackinac Island, where you won't find cars and trucks, but a lot of horses. Also, Sault Ste. Marie and the famous locks that ships go through to get from Lake Superior to Lake Huron. And we'll even visit a pretty beach on the shores of Lake Michigan. Day 6 of our Great Lakes cruise started with a beautiful sunrise over Georgian Bay as our ship made her way to our next destination, the small Canadian city of Midland, Ontario. And they certainly made a great first impression in Midland. As we disembarked the ship, they had a little welcome booth set up and offered all of us a tasty little pastry that Midland is known for, butter tarts. In the morning, I went on an excursion to a beautiful place known as Discovery Harbor. It was a base for the Canadian Navy in the 1800s, constructed just after the War of 1812. And back in those days, Navy ships looked like this. This is a replica of the HMS Tecumseth, a supply ship that sailed on Lake Erie. The Canadian Naval Base was located in a beautiful deep water harbor off of Georgian Bay, and tour guides told some interesting stories about the War of 1812 from the Canadian perspective. But what I enjoyed most about this excursion was just taking in the gorgeous views of not only the harbor, but also the architectural style of the buildings of that era. And look at all those beautiful trees on the hillside in the distance. Our ship spent all day docked in Midland, so in the afternoon, I walked through the downtown area, and it was really cool because they were very much into murals in downtown Midland. On the sides of buildings all throughout the downtown, they had painted these huge murals. I got a kick out of just walking around and looking at them. It was something unique that I hadn't seen in other towns, and I appreciated the talent of the artist that had created these. It's certainly something I'll remember about Midland when I think back on all the interesting places I visited on this 12-day Great Lakes cruise on Pearl Mist. The next morning, I had a time-lapse video going as our ship backed away from the dock in Midland and sailed out onto Georgian Bay again. And this day, day 7 of our 12-day Great Lakes cruise, was going to be different from all the rest. We left Midland at 8 a.m. on a Saturday and wouldn't reach our next destination until 24 hours later, 8 a.m. on Sunday. We had a long way to sail, all the way across Georgian Bay and Lake Huron to get to tomorrow's destination of Sault Ste. Marie. So today would be all about relaxing on the ship and enjoying a very lazy day of sailing. The cruise director led some group activities in one of the ship's lounges. In the other lounge, there was an art class going on. Some people played cards. Others read books. This woman worked at finishing up this jigsaw puzzle of the Great Lakes. Crew members demonstrated how to turn fruits and vegetables into whimsical works of art. And I spent a lot of time up on the top deck enjoying the warm weather while relaxing on the ship's very comfortable new patio furniture. That evening, the ship's entertainers gave us another nice musical performance. And this day was just a great opportunity to slow down and relax because tomorrow we'd have a very busy day in Sault Ste. Marie. Here's a time-lapse video I shot of our arrival in Sault Ste. Marie, which sits right along the border between Canada and the United States. In fact, we'd begin the day by docking on the Canadian side, Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario, Canada. But later in the day, our ship would move to the other side of the border and visit Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan, in the United States. In the morning, I went on a boat excursion to see the locks that allow ships to pass between Lake Huron and Lake Superior. And there are actually some older, smaller locks on the Canadian side that date back to 1895, and which are mainly used by small, privately owned pleasure boats, as well as tourist boats like the one that I was on. And then, after checking out the historic locks on the Canadian side, our little excursion boat took us over to the American side for a look at the much larger set of locks there that the big ships use. And from my drone, I was able to shoot this video of the big construction project, a new lock slated to be completed by 2030 that will provide much-needed additional capacity for the large freighters that sail on the Great Lakes. After a nice lunch break at our dock in Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario, our ship made the very quick trip across the river to Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan. And then we spent the rest of the afternoon there, docked next to an old retired freighter that sailed on the Great Lakes for almost 50 years and is now a museum. I am fascinated by all kinds of ships, so I definitely wanted to walk through the old freighter, the SS Valley Camp. And all of us passengers on Pearl Mist were provided free admission to the freighter. Up here on the main deck of the Valley Camp, you can see the big covers to her massive cargo hold, where for 38 years she carried iron ore and coal, and then later, after being sold to a different company, she carried stone and even agricultural products like grains. A portion of her massive cargo hold is kept fairly dark to help you visualize it as it was back in the day, and another portion of the cargo hold has been converted into a maritime museum, including quite a large section devoted to the wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald. They even had one of the actual lifeboats that was recovered after the wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald, even though none of the crew survived the accident and no bodies were ever recovered. I got a kick out of being able to walk around on my own and explore this old freighter, being able to look at everything from the bridge, officers' quarters, and the crew quarters. I really enjoyed walking through the ship and exploring the museum for an hour or two that afternoon in Sault Ste. Marie. When I woke up the next morning, our cruise ship, Pearl Mist, was just pulling into the harbor at Mackinac Island, Michigan, and we'd be here all day and have a chance to explore this beautiful island, and it would end up being one of the best days of the entire cruise. Now, if you're not familiar with Mackinac Island, it's quite unusual because they don't allow cars and trucks on the island. Instead, there are huge numbers of bicycles and even larger numbers of horses who are used to pull carriages full of passengers around the island. Horses are also used to pull all the freight that needs to be delivered on the island. At the pier next to where our ship docked, boatloads full of freight were delivered in the morning, and all day long that freight was loaded onto horse-drawn carts for delivery around the island. I really got a kick out of seeing the UPS guy loading up a horse-drawn cart full of Amazon packages. When in Rome, do as the Romans do, right? So when visiting Mackinac Island, part of the fun is getting a tour of the island from the comfort of a horse-drawn carriage. And Mackinac Island is absolutely gorgeous. In the downtown area, yards are beautifully landscaped and meticulously maintained. We were there right when all the lilac bushes were blooming, and they were really beautiful, and they smelled great too. Once you get out of the downtown area and head up the hill towards the world-famous Grand Hotel, things open up a bit, but it all has such a wonderful style of landscaping. It's very classy. You can tell they've spent a huge amount of time and money on just making everything on the island beautiful. During this horse-drawn carriage tour of the island, we headed in to the hills outside of town, which was beautiful forest land. And we made a stop at Arch Rock, a natural limestone arch overlooking the coast, which was really amazing to see. Natural beauty, Mother Nature at work. And a little later, the horses took us back towards town again and brought us to historic Fort Mackinac. During the War of 1812, there was an interesting battle on Mackinac Island. The Americans on the island hadn't gotten the word that war had been declared, and British troops were able to come in and catch them by surprise and capture the island. This fort was built on high ground, overlooking the harbor. Strategically, a great place for a fort in those days. And for me, it was a great place to shoot video of the beautiful harbor area below. Another beautiful spot on the island is the Grand Hotel. Following the Civil War, Mackinac Island became a very popular vacation spot for people in the Great Lakes region. In the 1880s, to accommodate an influx of tourists, the boat and railroad companies built hotels on the island, including this one, the Grand Hotel, which has not only survived, but thrived. It's famous for the huge porch in front of the hotel, which is said to be the largest front porch in the world. The Grand Hotel got a big boost from the 1980 film Somewhere in Time, starring Christopher Reeve and Jane Seymour. Quite a bit of the movie was filmed here at the Grand Hotel. I got a kick out of not only exploring the unique interior of the Grand Hotel, but also the beautiful grounds that surround it, and the little cottages that are located right next to the hotel. My parents both grew up in Chicago, Illinois, and I had heard a few stories growing up about how Mackinac Island was a great place to vacation. I never had the chance to visit it until now at the ripe old age of 65, but I'm sure glad that this Great Lakes cruise with Pearl Seas Cruises brought me here. Mackinac Island is a spectacular place you really ought to try to visit sometime. After a great day exploring the island, the icing on the cake was sailing under the Mackinac Bridge, also known as the Mighty Mac. It connects the upper and lower peninsulas of the state of Michigan and has become an iconic symbol of the state. The Mackinac Bridge spans the Straits of Mackinac, the body of water that connects Lake Michigan and Lake Huron. The bridge opened in 1957. It's nearly 5 miles long, and it's the longest suspension bridge between anchorages in the Western Hemisphere. The next morning, after sailing all night on Lake Michigan, our ship, Pearl Mist, entered the canal that leads from Lake Michigan to Muskegon Lake. And I did something that makes me a little nervous. I launched my drone from the ship while the ship was moving. Now, of course, I had the permission of the ship's management since they had invited me aboard to shoot photos and videos. A regular passenger is definitely not allowed to fly a drone from a cruise ship. But the part that makes me nervous about flying a drone from a moving cruise ship is not the takeoff, it's the landing. Trying to land a drone onto something that's moving is not only difficult, but dangerous. The drone uses GPS to try to stay in position during landing, but with the ship being in motion, the thing you're trying to land the drone on is constantly trying to move out from under the drone. So I have learned, the hard way, I might add, that if you want drone video of a cruise ship in motion while you're sailing on her, the best thing to do is to launch the drone when the ship is just about to dock at a port somewhere. That way you can land the drone when the ship isn't moving, either when it is actually docked or just before it docks when it's barely moving. So I knew the battery on my drone would allow the drone to fly for about 45 minutes, and so I launched the drone when I figured we were less than 45 minutes from docking in the city of Muskegon, Michigan. But it was just a guess because I really didn't know exactly where the dock was. And after flying the drone for 25 or 30 minutes and getting all these great shots of the ship in motion, I was watching the drone's battery level get lower and lower, and I was starting to worry that maybe I had launched it a little too soon and that the battery might run out before the ship made it to the dock. So I'm telling you, I was getting really nervous as I watched that battery level drop. And when the drone gets down to about 30% battery level, it wants to automatically fly back home to wherever it launched from, which in this case was in the middle of the canal several miles behind me. So I had to override the automatic return to home function and all the warnings that were coming up on my controller screen about a low battery. And that all made me even more nervous. Well, finally, with the ship not yet at the dock and the battery down to only 20% now, I made the decision to land the drone, even though the ship hadn't docked yet. But luckily, the ship had slowed down to almost nothing, and I was able to land the drone safely. I have to tell you, what a feeling of relief it was to get that drone back aboard the ship. Once we were safely docked and I swapped the drone battery out for a fully charged one, I had a much easier drone flight from a stationary platform to get this video of Pearl Mist docked in Muskegon. And notice that little bus that's coming in, styled like a streetcar or a cable car. That bus took me into town for a very nice tour of downtown Muskegon, which I enjoyed a lot more than I expected I would. Muskegon is one of those places that didn't sound all that interesting to me compared to the other places we had visited, like Mackinac Island or Niagara Falls, but Muskegon surprised me. I started by visiting the Muskegon Heritage Museum of Business and Industry, and they were super friendly and clued me in on Muskegon's story. Back in the day, Muskegon was a booming center of manufacturing. There were many factories in Muskegon making all sorts of interesting products. One of the most famous was the Brunswick Corporation, which had a big factory here in Muskegon, and Brunswick was very well known for making pin-setting machines for bowling alleys. The Muskegon Heritage Museum had a complete working Brunswick pin-setting machine, and it was really cool to watch in operation. Brunswick wasn't the only big manufacturer in Muskegon back in the day. There were lots of factories here, and in the Heritage Museum, they had a very elaborate working version of some equipment from one of those factories. A large steam generator in the basement turned a motor, and a series of belts connected that motor to all sorts of different equipment nearby. So basically anything that you would need in a manufacturing facility, from a bandsaw to a drill press to a lathe or just about any other mechanical thing, was powered back in those days by one big motor in the basement and a series of belts that connected all the equipment to it. It was very interesting to see. Muskegon also had a lot of factories that made parts for the automobile industry, but eventually most of that manufacturing dried up and moved elsewhere, and Muskegon, like a lot of cities in the Midwest, went from boom to bust. But they did a pretty good job of reinventing themselves. These days, Muskegon is a popular vacation destination because of some pretty great beaches along Lake Michigan, and great fishing and recreation on Lake Michigan and Muskegon Lake. They've also reinvented downtown Muskegon. The big shopping mall from the 1980s is long gone, but there are a lot of nice restaurants and places for tourists like me, and it's a very walkable downtown. I got a kick out of visiting this historic part of downtown where they had these big, beautiful Victorian-style mansions from back in the day. And I've got this thing for maple trees, so I just about melted when I spotted this beautiful Japanese maple in the yard of one of the homes in the historic district. I also did a couple of interesting tours in Muskegon. I toured LST-393, a World War II era ship that was used to transport all sorts of military vehicles, from jeeps to howitzers to tanks. LST stands for Landing Ship Tank. There were over 1,000 LSTs built for World War II, and this one, LST-393, is one of only 2 to survive in her original configuration. The big cavernous interior portion of LST-393, where the tanks and other military vehicles would have been back in the day, is now a very nice military museum. And visitors are free to walk all throughout the ship and explore it on their own, everywhere from the engine room to the mess hall and galley, the captain's quarters, the wheelhouse, and the outer decks. I've never been on an LST before, so I really enjoyed the opportunity to explore this one. Later that afternoon, I had an even more amazing naval military experience. The cruise line offered an excursion to see the USS Silversides, a World War II-era submarine. She was one of the most successful submarines in the Pacific theater of World War II, with 23 confirmed sinkings. She's been brought back to really good condition, and I had full access to explore just about every part of this submarine, from the torpedo room to the control room, the engine room, the galley, the captain's quarters, and everything else. If you'd like to come along with me for a full tour of USS Silversides and highlights of her service, click on that link in the top right corner of the screen to see a 5-minute video I made about USS Silversides. Our final port of call for this 12-day cruise was Milwaukee, Wisconsin. This was the aerial view as the ship pulled up to the dock. You can tell that the water was pretty shallow there. If you look in the lower left corner of the screen, you can see sand and silt from the lake bottom getting kicked up by the ship's thrusters. Now, from this angle, you have a pretty good look at that building on the right. That's called Discovery World. I spent several hours in it later in the day. I'll tell you about that in a minute. Look over on the right side of the screen in this shot. Notice that unusually shaped white structure. I'll fly my drone in for a closer look here. That's the Milwaukee Art Museum. And I want you to pay particular attention to that part of the building that sticks up into the air. Believe it or not, it features what is essentially a very fancy sunshade for the pavilion below it. We're looking at it here in the morning when the sun was low in the sky, so the sunshade was not deployed. Now check this out. It's a video I shot of it a few hours later when the shade was all opened up. In the world of architecture, this is known as a brise soleil. That's a French term that literally means sunbreaker. It's designed to lower the cost of cooling the building by shading the windows below it from the sun. This motorized brise soleil on the Milwaukee Art Museum that opens up like a wing is probably about the most expensive brise soleil in the world. Here's a photo of a much more low-tech version of a brise soleil, keeping the sun's rays off those big glass panels on this building's entryway. But anyway, our ship was docked right in front of Discovery World. So I Googled it and learned about how it's a museum that's all about science, technology, and the environment. There's also a large part of Discovery World that is an aquarium. And then what really intrigued me was when I read that they also have a model train exhibit. And I love model trains, so right then and there, I decided that I had to visit Discovery World. Let's just start with the model trains. They had a very nice layout with very realistic buildings and scenery. It takes a lot of work to make a detailed, realistic-looking layout like this. Very impressive. These are HO scale model trains running on the layout. That's the most common type of model trains. If you'd like to see a video I shot of one of the trains traveling over the entire layout here at Discovery World, you should see a link to that video in the upper right corner of the screen right about now. At my house, I actually run a much larger scale of model trains known as G-scale. If you look around on my YouTube channel, you'll definitely find some videos of my model trains. Another part of Discovery World that I found quite interesting was an entire section relating to guitars, musical instruments, and sound recording, and especially the musician, inventor, and Wisconsin native Les Paul. He was one of the pioneers of the solid body electric guitar. Les Paul was one of the earliest innovators in multi-track recording, overdubbing, delay effects, phasing, a lot of recording techniques that were way ahead of their time when Les Paul was playing around with them in the 1940s and 1950s. At the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame that I had visited in Cleveland about a week earlier, they had a permanent exhibit about Les Paul, and now here I was seeing a museum display about him here in Milwaukee at Discovery World. Also, there's an entire section of Discovery World that is an aquarium. It was really nicely done and impressed me a lot. I got a kick out of seeing this piranha. And a very interesting display showing the flow of water through the 5 Great Lakes. Also an actual working periscope, which I found ironic since I had been at a submarine museum the day before, but the periscope there did not actually work. But this one did. So there you have a few highlights from my visit to Discovery World in Milwaukee. And Milwaukee was our final destination on this 12-day cruise on the Great Lakes with Pearl Seas Cruises on their cruise ship Pearl Mist. I really enjoyed this cruise a lot. I got to see some wonderful places that I'll never forget, like Niagara Falls and Mackinac Island, a place that really surprised me with her beauty. I had fun at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in Cleveland, was so impressed with the pristine beauty of Parry Sound, Ontario, and the highlight of the trip for me, an old DJ at heart, was standing in the studio in the basement of Motown Records in Detroit, where so many hit records were recorded back in the 60s and 70s. If you want to book a cruise, I'd like to recommend my travel agent, Caitlin Gallagher, and I really want to thank my friends at American Cruise Lines who made all this possible, flying me out to Toronto at their expense to sail with their sister cruise line, Pearl Seas Cruises, so that I can make these videos to show the world what's so cool about Pearl Mist and a cruise on the Great Lakes. I'm Jim Zim. Thanks for watching.